Hi, I am Kayla Matthews, and this is my week 2 video response on my perspective and what I learned through chapter 2, the story of leadership. And so, to begin, as I was reading throughout chapter 2, what I learned is even though despite various situations I had, opposing sides, good, faithful, or bad outcomes, things along those lines, it usually became the rise of two options. And so we had the selfless and the selfish. And so I found that to be quite interesting because when you look back in history, you would just assume that it usually just arises as one. And so when we talk about like a dictatorship, typically with me, like I would just assume that, one bad street typically leads one to be able to begin a dictatorship, coercion, power, things like that. But actually, as I was reading through multiple component sections of the chapter, it was hard to believe that there was actually the option for most of them here. And so what that means for me is like you would have the option to, be able to lead a foundation of individuals to a successful goal, whatever that may be, or, take the position as you will and lead them towards a road of power, a road of destruction, things along those lines. And so what I learned is, throughout the entirety of the chapter, there were typically two options on whether or not what type of leader that individual or group may become. And so that was the most interesting part that I found. But I actually took a few notes on the book, and so what I am learning about history and development of leadership thought, I would like to first compare, I would say, this generation versus when we talk about the leadership in families and bands and tribes at the beginning of the chapter. And so now we go towards, we talk about equality and having women in more leadership. And so you will still see the patriarchal rise of leadership. However, there's definitely a greater increase of women inclusion in leadership, and it's more focused now. Instead of dominance and gender, it's actually more of personality and traits that, would strive them to become a leader. And so I think that's why it's difficult, at the end of the chapter and even today, as to why there is a difficulty on defining leadership. It's just because it's more of a behavioral trait of leadership than it is, a gender, a title. And so of course leadership is a title, but we're not going to define leadership as, okay, patriarchy in the past throughout years and decades of history typically was, the patriarchal society, and so everything was ran by the man, the father, simply because the dominance ran throughout the family. And that is what surprised me when we lead into the leadership of bands and tribes, is there was a singular leader, and then in addition to that, it wasn't based on, it was just a man that was being chosen. However, it was based on, personality, it was based on traits. Which of these individuals are going to lead us to successfully achieve our goal? And so that actually surprised me, because I would just assume it was just a position based on, hierarchy, based on family. And so it actually switched my perspective on how they run their leadership, because of course I'm not quite familiar with how tribes run kind of their leadership roles and positions and things like that. However, it did, kind of change my thinking and foundation of, like a leadership is one person. And so throughout all these different stories, leadership is, typically one person, but that doesn't mean that it can't be multiple individuals with, shared characteristics that have what it takes to be a leader instead of just choosing one individual. And so as we're going through the rest of it, I think that was the main thing that stood out to me, is just that there's actually one quote in leadership in the nation and state. And so right here it says, one is an all-powerful leadership of coercion and force, while the other is an authoritative parental expression of leadership. There is a third view, one of the leader as servant to the led. And so throughout the entire chapter, I was mainly focused on typically the leader that was chosen is the one that goes towards servant leadership, the servant approach, making sure we are serving our people, we are serving the Lord, instead of, having a selfish malintention that if I serve myself, I'm going to get my benefit in the long run. And so throughout, multiple components throughout the entire chapter, I've learned that typically the person that had the most success in a group setting, in an individual setting, in a spiritual setting, is always the one that chose to lead the people rather than choosing themselves. And so, like I said prior, it is difficult to define leadership, but I did find a major comparison throughout, multiple sections, that the person that had the option to choose themselves or to choose to serve others, typically the one that chose to serve others before themselves, tended to have the most success in the long run. So, thank you.